With democracy on the docket, the big question is whether the courts are equipped to handle the likes of Donald Trump. George Conway is here to discuss. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. George Conway, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Hey, Marc, how are you doing?
I could tell you I'm doing great, but the country's kind of going to shit.
Yes, it is. At least we're not in Guantanamo yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to start there, but I got a lot to discuss with you about big law and it's shaming itself. But I want to start with your assessment of where we are. You had, I think, the most dire prediction of what Donald Trump would be in a second term. There were a lot of people who were like, "Oh, he'll be better. He'll be different. He has whatever." And you were like, "No, no, he is a psychopath." I forget you had another term you used in conjunction.
He's a narcissistic psychopath, a narcissistic sociopath, a
That's it. No, narcissist sociopath, right?
yeah, I mean,
He is.
they're all, it's like talking about a criminal and a thief it's just using different words to describe the same thing.
So I think it's fair to say you were the most correct. Like if you had to predict, like The Price is Right, like where he would be, he is more unhinged than he was last time by a lot. He's more
Yep,
unhinged as president than he was as a candidate.
yep.
He is doing wildly arbitrary things. I mean, some of these tariff stuff, I mean, I'm not an economics expert. It just seems like he wakes up and just announces a tariff on something and no one
Yep,
around him even knows what he's doing.
correct.
What do you assess? Like, how do you assess where we are with the Trump presidency?
It's exactly where you would expect it to be. If anything, it's moving more quickly, thanks to his use of Elon Musk as a sledgehammer and his, two psychopaths for the price of one. And what you got, I mean, it's just, I think things are going south faster than even I thought. I mean, he's always worse than you think he's going to be. And even, when I look back and I remember in 2016, oh, he's not as bad as some of these people are saying he is. And it turned out he was worse. And that is what caused me to reassess everything I was thinking and what I thought about the guy. And I came to the conclusion that he's worse than you can imagine. There is no bottom with him, and we have not yet reached bottom, believe it or not.
I want to tap into your expertise as a former, and I think this is a fair description, a former Wall Street lawyer. Is that a
Yeah.
fair
I
description?
mean, 52nd Street, but yeah, we we did take lots of takeover litigation at Wachtell that we represent.
So why does the business community like don't they like what like shouldn't they be up in arms because like they want predictability in policy, they don't I assume like tariffs. Like why do we not see the business community speaking out here?
Well, I think we do that because they're afraid. They don't want to be singled out. They want, all these businesses, they compete, right? They compete for um, market share, they compete for customers, they compete even when they're hiring employees, but they also, they are competing with each other for influence and competing with each other not to be a target. Okay. And, it's basically it's just an extension of the problem that we've seen in so many realms with Republicans in the Senate and in the House and and in politics. We're seeing people are afraid to say anything that put them in the crosshairs. There's a big collective action problem. I mean, the Republicans could have ridden themselves of Trump long ago if they'd held hands together and jumped together.
When do you think they could have done
I
that?
think they could have done that in 2017, 2018, maybe even, and they certainly could have done it in 2021 by, the Republican Senate could have made sure that he was never eligible for another federal office again. And the problem is nobody wanted to take responsibility for that. And, and it's also true, you're running a business, your job, you're running a public company. Your fiduciary duties are not to the American people. They are not to the Constitution. Your fiduciary duties are to maximize wealth for shareholders. And if you go out and you say, this is terrible, and then Donald Trump trashes you and your stock price falls, you will not have done anything for your shareholders. You may have done something for your country, probably not, because all of the other people who are in similarly situated, your competitors and others, have not joined you. And so you're just going to be this one voice out there. And so the result is it's just not worth it to anyone to speak out. And we're seeing, this is the problem, what we're seeing in the legal profession as well. We've seen it again, as I said, with Republicans. And this is how the road to autocracy is paved.
Yeah. So we've talked in the past, and there's been a lot of commentary about how, a lot of legacy media has, for these reasons, has capitulated. We've talked about the business community and the reasons why they have. And I did want to get to big law. So this is a place where you and I are maybe better situated than almost any two people. We both worked at very large law firms, both in the American Lawyer 50. Yours was bigger in New York. I was a partner for many years at the law firm that is actually at the center of the controversy.
I learned a lot yesterday about how big it was. It is.
Yeah. Perkins Coie, where I was a partner for many years. And in full disclosure, I was also the partner who probably was engaged or had the representations of Hillary Clinton, the representations of the DNC in beating Donald Trump in the post-election 2020 that sparked a lot of his ire. So I think, you and I are well situated to discuss this. The thing about law firms that I want to challenge, maybe it's not a challenge, maybe you'll agree, is that unlike corporations, they are actually not supposed to maximize the value to their shareholders or to their partners. They are actually supposed to look out for their clients, right?
Yeah.
Their primary obligation is not as fiduciaries to one another, which they do have to their partners, but theirs is to look out for their clients' interests first.
Correct.
And the other thing that makes law firms, I think, different is that they take an oath. Correct. As being members of the bar, right? They are given a right that very few people are given. It's essentially an exemption from the antitrust laws, right? They are given the ability to practice law when other people are not, and in exchange for that, they have certain obligations to the courts.
In exchange for that privilege, you take on certain professional obligations. It's not, it's unlike, if you go to Harvard Business School and then become an employee at a big investment bank, you don't take an oath to comply with certain professional ethics. I mean, you may have an incentive to do so because if your reputation goes to shit, you will lose business and you will hurt your firm. But this is a profession. This is a profession that is, as you say, it's completely different.
Yeah. So, in light of that, I find the silence of big law absolutely appalling. I mean, just appalling, because they don't have those excuses that maybe the rest of the business world has. And they have, I think, a greater obligation to the Constitution and the rule of law. And as they sit back and watch, Donald Trump destroy American democracy and enact clearly unconstitutional executive orders and undermine the rule of law and then attack a law firm. Actually attacked two law firms, first Covington and Burling, I think the largest law firm in Washington, D.C., I think by head count, and then Perkins Coie. What do you make of this? Am I being unfairly harsh on big law, or do you agree?
No, I agree. I think I'm just as harsh as you, although I will, I can explain what's happening and I can rationalize it from the standpoint of, let's pretend I'm still at Wachtell. I can't help my clients if I'm put out of business. Let's put it that way. I am not, let's just say I'm not involved in politics. I do mergers and acquisitions. My job is to advise people on Delaware corporate law. I'm not an expert in politics. And, no one's going to hire me if, these companies that want to do merge. I'm speaking specifically about people at Wachtell to be critical. I'm just being hypothetical. Let's suppose I'm still doing it. I agree. I'm a client service person. And I don't think I help my clients by going out. I don't help my partners either, who I do have fiduciary duties to, as you know, by going out there and standing out and marching in the streets about the rule of law. And I think that is a lot of the mentality that you are seeing. Let's leave apart the people who are trying to curry favor with the administration. I think most lawyers in big law who make a fuckload of money, okay, lawyers make a lot of money today in the high end, even some not terribly good ones these days. And, they just feel that they view themselves almost the same way that the president of some banks may view themselves. It's like, this is not my business. My business is not politics. My business is advising clients, and I don't advise clients about politics. I don't lobby, and it doesn't serve my client's interest or my financial interest or my partner's financial interest to get involved with this. Now, I may write a check for, I wrote a check to Kamala Harris, and I do that stuff, but it's just not. I'm not jeopardizing my career, my practice, my family, my well-being to stick my head out. And I think that's where a lot of people are coming from, and where I understand that. On the other hand, I agree with you, Marc, that not only do we have obligations as citizens, not only does the chairman and CEO of, speaking hypothetically, I don't know, J.P. Morgan Chase has an obligation as a citizen to say, this is wrong, this is bad for the economy. I think all people of intelligence and means and goodwill have an obligation to speak out for their country, for the country that made it possible, for the system that made it possible for them to achieve their positions and their wealth. Let's set them aside for a moment. But I agree with you, lawyers have even more of an obligation to do that. Because not only does our well-being economically and as a free people just depend on the system that we have of constitutionalism, constitutional democracy, and the rule of law, lawyers are the gateway to that. Lawyers have sworn, as you say, they have taken on the oath, the professional obligations, so that they can make a living off the rule of law. And they're not only is it they have a moral obligation to stick up for that system, they also have a logical, financial, and personal interest in doing that, because if this system gets destroyed, and it turns out that 5 years from now we're living in an autocratic country with one functioning political branch, where Congress is just a rubber stamp or just a 1930s era Reichstag, and the courts are disempowered because they can't enforce their orders, and J.D. Vance is president, or Don Jr. is president, or God knows who, because I'm assuming that there are going to be enough cheeseburgers to finally put an end to the current president's reign, even if he tries to have a third term. If we get to that point, who needs good lawyers? Who needs lawyers to make crafty arguments, intellectual arguments to judges? We need are fixers, people who have influence, people who are, who hang out at Mar-a-Lago, right? It's just what you're doing by succumbing to this corruption. Lawyers, I'm speaking now to the legal community, is you're putting yourself out of business. Unless you want to be one of those sleazebags who's a gatekeeper and makes money just by saying, here, I can take you to Mar-a-Lago with me, like a lot of political consultants do. Is that what you want to be? There are some people who actually want to be that, and they may,
Right, but this is my point. I think you and I agree on this.
Yeah, we do.
You don't need to be a lawyer to do that.
No.
The law. If you're a big firm lawyer, you are able, as you say, to make a really good living because you have a skill that nobody else has. If it comes down to just who is in favor or not in favor with Donald Trump, I mean, he doesn't give a shit what the law says.
Yeah, you're better off going to the driving range.
Yeah.
Who needs to go to law school?
We'll be right back with more of my conversation with George Conway. But each day, Donald Trump is opening a new front in his assault on democracy, leaving chaos and confusion in his wake. Well, Democracy Docket's new accountability tracker is your source for a top-down accounting of these developments as they happen. Click on the link above or in the description below to become a premium Democracy Docket member and receive access to our exclusive Trump Accountability Tracker today. So we saw a lot of cowardice around this situation in which these law firms were targeted. We did see Williams and Connolly, which is a large law firm in Washington, D.C. It's a little bit of a different kind of firm, I think. It is really, they are known as a kind of a bet the company litigation firm.
Right.
They are excellent litigators, top tier, top 5 litigation firms in the country, but they don't. But as a result, they may be freed from a little bit of that.
They are. They're freed because of the nature of their practice as big company litigation. They're not. I don't know that they do a lot of lobbying, even though they're a Washington firm. And they're not a national firm with all these offices and all these mouths to feed. It's a very it's a tight knit, close knit firm, and people go to Williams and Connolly when they're in deep shit about, and, but still that being said, I have so much admiration for what that firm is doing, taking this case on. And Judge Howell, I went to the hearing yesterday where Judge Howell granted a temporary restraint.
The DC, for people who don't know, Judge Howell is the DC federal judge who heard the case that Williams and Connolly brought on behalf of Perkins Coie to challenge the executive order targeting them.
And she went out of her way to praise Williams and Connolly's courage in standing up and bringing this lawsuit. And it wasn't, it was perfectly relevant to actually the merits of what she was discussing, because her point was Perkins Coie is threatened with destruction by this order. All right, and its lawyers, there are affidavits that they submitted, and the argument is essentially this: if they can't service enough clients, if clients are going to choose to go elsewhere because they don't want to be represented by a firm that the president of the United States is pissed off at, or if the executive order stands, prohibits them from going into federal buildings and prohibits the government from doing business doing business with people who hire Perkins Coie. They can't service their clients. Their individual lawyers are going to leave the firm. I mean, that's the thing about law firms that makes them more fragile. And that's another big difference between law firms and other businesses is your capital, right? It's not your plant. It's not the things you make cars with. It's not the banking technology of your systems and whatever, or pick a business, or your servers, or it's the people. The lawyers go out the door because they can't service Boeing, let's say, because Boeing is a big, it's a Washington law firm, as you know, Washington State law firm. It represents Boeing, and it's got a big defense contract. If they can't service those people, they're going to go to they're going to basically join other firms, and other firms are going to say, hey, come here. We can support you and your practice here since Boeing can't hire you anymore. If you work at Perkins Coie, come to our firm with your book of business. Law firms can disintegrate in a week because of that. And to get back to the point, and this is a point that Williams and Connolly was making in court yesterday, and a point that was accepted correctly by Judge Howell, who was an experienced lawyer, who previously practiced law and is familiar. I don't think she worked at a big law firm. I think she knows how the law business works. She said, Williams and Connolly could be next. And she was giving that.
I think she asked the government that, right?
She asked Chad Mizell, who was representing, I got something to say about that, who was representing the government there, and just says, well, what's there to keep the president from declaring that Williams and Connolly is not acting in the best interest of the United States? The same way it concludes, it's defending these people who the president thinks are terrible. Why isn't the next executive order going to be, and then she read the text of the title of the protective order, Protecting the Country Against Williams and Connolly. They run the same risk too. I mean, they may not in the sense that they don't have a government contracting practice. I'm not sure they do. They're not, their practice is different. But they too, like for example, Williams County is a big white collar defense practice. And, one of the things that was described in the submission by Perkins Coie, by Williams Connolly on behalf of Perkins Coie, is that they've already had a meeting with Justice Department officials canceled. Right? They were supposed to discuss something about about some legal problem that one of their clients had, and it was canceled because the lawyer at the Justice Department presumably was trying to comply with the executive order, which says that you cannot engage with Perkins Coie. And so anyway, the point is that Williams and Connolly is taking a risk that they are going to be the next one. And all the law firms that stand up to Trump are taking that risk. And that is the problem, is that, it's not worth it to any one firm. It's the tragedy of the commons or the prisoner's dilemma that game theorists talk about. It's like, if we all knew everyone would stick together and we had some way to enforce that, we could fight them. But Trump, has instinctively, he's not a genius, he's a moron, as I've said for long, but he understands this because he's a bully, is that you pick people off one by one. You make an example of one, you scare everybody else, and you make noises that you're going to go after other people, which he did. A lot of bad people out there, law firms. We're going to take care of that. He said something to that effect last week.
He did. No, he actually said, he was asked after he signed the order by a right-wing outlet. I don't know that it was open press, but there were press asking some questions by a right-wing outlet. Essentially,
I think it was Maria Bartiromo maybe asked the question? I don't remember.
Oh, okay. Actually, you're right. And then she asked on Saturday. So she was asked twice. And twice once he said, yes, there are other bad people and the Department of Justice will go after them. And then Maria Bartiromo asked about other law firms, and he suggested he might go after that they'd be going after other law firms. So it was kind of a twofer. It was like, yes, more executive orders targeting law firms, but also the Department of Justice may be cleaning up and going after the lawyers as well.
Yep. And, and as Williams and Connolly was noting, I mean, it's just completely, and Perkins Coie, it's completely irrational. The people who are there pissed, who Trump is pissed off at, you and some other people, are gone from the firm.
Yeah, left in
so they're basically punishing people, including support staff. Thousands of support staffers could basically be out of a job if this firm goes under for things that it doesn't do anymore. I mean, I guess it has a shell of an election law practice left, but with no offense to who those lawyers are. But, I mean, I read the affidavits. You took 50 lawyers with you.
50, 50.
Yeah. And that's so they don't really do that anymore. The stuff that representing the Democratic Party. They don't really do that anymore. It's like, so what's the point? The point is that he's completely irrational and he wants to punish everybody.
So I get asked this question a lot, and I'm going to ask you because you have actually more insight into his pathology than I do. People have asked exactly that question, which is, why did he issue an executive order against Perkins Coie, which you left in 2021? The other lawyer who he mentioned also left in 2021, or he referenced left in 2021, go to someplace else. Is it because he didn't realize that we had left, or is he making a point of going after the firm to show that there's never a redemption?
I think that's right. I think he's doing it to show, because I think a lot of the things he does is because he can. Okay, he doesn't Greenland, Canada, the Panama Canal. He's just a sociopath. He's a narcissistic sociopath who just doesn't care about facts and reality. It's about exerting power and control. And if he can make an example of this big law firm, it really doesn't matter to him that there's no logical tie between the things he's upset about and like even apart the fact that there's no basis for the allegations of wrongdoing, that which was another aspect of it. I mean, there was a whole discussion about the fact that he sued you and the Democratic Party and got his ass kicked in the Southern District of Florida, that they brought an indictment against the guy, against Sussman, Michael Sussman, who commissioned the Fusion GPS investigation, I gather, and he was acquitted. And because he didn't do anything wrong. And
he was acquitted quite quickly, by the way.
The jury I don't know the exact, like in half an hour. And it's like, what
I was going to say, I don't know.
One of those, yet this guy, this piece of shit, Chad Mizell.
Okay, that's my question. So Chad Mizell, I'm going to pause you here for a second. So everyone needs to understand that, I was waiting to see who shows up on behalf of the Department of Justice to defend what everyone seems to feel pretty clearly is unconstitutional, inappropriate, unlawful executive order. And so originally I was like, okay, are we in another one of these situations where they force some line assistant to show up and do the argument? And lo and behold, to my great astonishment, I don't know about yours, the person who shows up is actually like the number 3 person at the Justice Department. This is the chief of staff to Pam Bondi. This is like the person who is closest to Pam Bondi's operations. They did the Attorney General, and not someone who I have ever heard of. I've never heard of a chief of staff to the Attorney General showing up in a court hearing ever. You would not expect it in what is a emergency motion. I mean, not to say this is not an important matter, it is, but for the standpoint of the United States government, a temporary restraining order motion would not be the place you would normally see the Attorney General's chief of staff show up. So that happens, and I want to get to your answer, because what the fuck is that about?
No, what the fuck that is about is that there are only a certain number of reliable people in the Justice Department for the Trump.
So who is Chad? Who is this?
Chad Mizell. I mean, I don't know his full background, but what struck me is I didn't actually know. I recognized the name afterwards when I saw the spelling of it, and I said, okay, I've seen that name before. I couldn't quite get it in the courtroom. I thought it might have been spelled differently, but I looked it up, and he's the chief of staff to the Attorney General. That's a position that is not a litigating position. It never has been. Chief of staff is somebody who basically sets, and it's a lawyer in the case of the Justice Department, because a lawyer has to talk intelligibly and understand issues that the Attorney General is dealing with and be the right-hand person to the Attorney General. So, but it's not a litigating position. It's a staff position that's designed to make the Attorney General's life easier for her, organize meetings, and sort of make sure that the Attorney General's directives are being followed up by other senior staff members of the Justice and other senior officials of the Justice Department. But basically, that's not somebody who goes to court. The person who would normally have gone to court here, and it would have been an important one in any administration where there's an important initiative that's been initiated by executive order, would have been at the most the head of the civil division. Yeah. The acting, or in this case, it would be the acting head of the civil division, because I assume they haven't gotten a confirmed head of the civil division yet. That's as far up as you're going to go, or a very senior person in the United States Attorney's Office.
Which is what I would have assumed, honestly.
Right. But, and it was Mizell, because they, who's going to make some of these crazy arguments to Judge Beryl Howell than some politically compromised, gaslighting hack who is, thoroughly loyal not to the constitutional laws of the United States, but to Donald Trump. And that's what this man did. He was basically, I was like, this is gaslighting in open court. And I have to say, it was gaslighting, talking about basically, I don't know if he used the word hoax, but it was like the Russia hoax. And he was talking about the great work of special counsel Durham. Okay, Durham is the guy who we just, we mentioned the acquittal of Michael Sussman. It was a trumped up case that the jury threw out. Durham thoroughly disgraced himself. It was Barr's attempt to try to create a narrative whereby all the, the Russian investigation was shown to be a hoax, and there was no attempt to interfere with the 2016 election by the Russians, a fact that has been disproven over and over again, not just by 17 intelligence agencies that put out a statement in 2017, but by the Mueller report, which talks about at great length and conducted an investigation about that. And then, of course, the Senate Intelligence Committee report, I think was a 2019 or 2020, that was issued by Republicans, including Marco fucking Rubio, found the Russians. There was no dispute. The Russians wanted Trump to win. They tried to help him. Now, whether or not Trump knew that or acted collusively with that, I mean, some people in the campaign did. Certainly, Paul Manafort did, and his right-hand person Gates. But the truth is, there was an attempt to influence the election by Russia in 2016. What effect it had, we'll never know. And he's basically saying that it was all made up to the federal judge. And the judge is saying, yeah, you talk about Sussman. Well, there was this guy named Mueller. she basically said that to him. I have to say, Judge Beryl Howell, she had this very kind demeanor and very soft-spoken demeanor. And she goes, well, let me ask you this. Just want to sort of understand your position. And she sort of asked these questions that trapped him into saying things. At the same time, she's listening to his answers, and you couldn't capture. I mean, everybody was listening to it on, I guess, the phone. There was a dial-in line, and all the reporters listened to it. I was in the courtroom, the first row of the spectator section, and I was just watching her face, and she's watching Mizell say all this crazy shit, and she's like, she's trying to keep a straight face, and she's like, okay, you're being a. Well, you're representing your client zealously, I guess, and she just, she got some incredible concessions and some incredible admissions from the government. One of them was, I talked earlier about, could Williams and Connolly be the subject of the next executive order? And he hemmed and he hawed and he tried to evade the question, but he couldn't say no. What he ended up saying is, well, if the president makes the determination, and it's the president's sole determination to make that there's a national security threat, yes. So all Donald Trump has to say is, hey, it's a national, if Perkins Coie is a national security threat, then somebody defending Perkins Coie is a national security threat. No Williams and Connolly people are allowed in any courthouse in the United States. And I'm ordering the GSA to do that. And the U.S. Marshals Service, which he technically has the power to do.
So I got one final question for you. Where does this go? Obviously the judge issued a block this. I assume this will be followed by a preliminary injunction that'll get appealed. I don't mean just where does this case go? I mean you are a great prognosticator of what Donald Trump is capable of.
Well, I said Kamala Harris. I thought Kamala Harris was going to win.
No. I qualified it, George. I said you're a great prognosticator of what Donald Trump is capable of. I mean, in some sense, I think you have suggested that actually liberals have consistently misjudged and underestimated how bad Trump can be.
Yeah, we all have.
You have been.
I've been right.
Yeah, and so I want to use the last few minutes we have to kind of tap into that. And here we sit in the middle of March of the first year of his presidency.
Yeah, we've barely begun.
Right. So what do you see as the arc of this?
The arc is continually downward. And, I've talked.
So you don't think the business community ever steps up and protects? You don't think the Republican Party ever revolts?
See, the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party is not a functional political party anymore, in any normal sense. I mean, I think where this goes is this is going to get. I hate to say this because I'm not advocating violence at all, because I think the violence, if there's going to be violence coming, it's going to be coming from the administration, because that's. We're talking about a malignant narcissist here, but the court I admire my friend, you and my friend Norm Eisen and Williams and Connolly and Arnold and Porter and all the people out there who are bringing these cases to call the administration to account. And I really admire the district judges who are standing up for the rule of law and issuing orders and injunctions and ordering discovery in the case of Doge that Judge Chutkin just did. I have no the words cannot describe how inspired I am by them. That being said, I have grave doubts as to whether the solution ultimately is litigable. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is, at the end of the day, the courts can't compel compliance with their own orders except essentially through the United States Marshal Service. And the United States Marshal Service, God bless these marshals, they are great. I was chatting with some of them in the courthouse. They are honorable people, and they believe in the rule of law. And frankly, they're terribly upset about what's going on, but let's set that aside. They take orders. They get paychecks from the government, and they have supervisors. And if the supervisors say, well, we're not going to hand out this judicial order to be enforced to arrest the undersecretary of something or other for openly defying a court order at the behest of the President of the United States. If the head of the United States Marshal Service, who's a political appointee, basically says all judicial enforcement orders issued against government officials have to go through me for processing, and it sits on his desk, there's going to be nobody to enforce these orders. And so I'm very concerned that at some point, right now they're just sort of screwing around the government. The government has ways of sort of avoiding obeying court orders by just being incompetent and saying, oops, we forgot to tell these people. Oh, we didn't know. It's a big government. It's right as 6 weeks to tell everybody in the government what to do. And, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know what the right hand didn't know what the left hand do. Right now, they're kind of playing that game that judges get really mad at, because it hasn't just happened in this administration. It's happened in prior administrations. They're at that stage, except a little more aggressive at that. But at some point, they're going to lose so many of these cases because they're violating so many laws and so many constitutional provisions. They're going to lose a lot of these cases. Maybe not all of them. Maybe the Supreme Court will cut them some slack at some point. But at some point, they're going to basically face with, do we really want to follow these court orders? And I don't think they will, because I don't see, they don't care about what the law says. They don't care what the clause, what the 14th Amendment says about birthright citizenship. They don't care about the appointments clause. In the case of Doge, they don't care about whether money has been appropriated by Congress in statute, in appropriations bills that say that you must spend this money. They don't care, they don't care about the First Amendment in the case of the case against Perkins Coie, or the Fifth Amendment, or the Sixth Amendment, which they were also joined under. They don't care about any of it. They don't care about the law. Law is just a piece of paper. And so are judicial orders. They're running roughshod over the Constitution, running roughshod over the Article 1 prerogatives of Congress. There's no reason to expect them to say, oh, well, Article 3 is different. We're going to obey the federal judges. And that's point one. Point two is, even if they never get into open defiance of court orders, they still have this ability to kind of slow things down and play games with judges that they're doing. But it's even worse than that. At the end of the day, the people, the right-wingers, right-wing lawyer types who are attacking judges have a point in that judges cannot tell the executive what to do, right? There are things you can't tell the executive not to invade Canada, or not to send troops to the Panama Canal. But you also judges can't micromanage the executive branch. They're not capable of it. Even when they have a legal basis to do so, they can't. Like, for example, this Perkins Coie case. The executive order purports to basically ban or tightly regulate whether Perkins Coie lawyers can go into any federal building. Right? How is a federal judge going to monitor that?
Right, because there's federal buildings all over the place.
They're federal buildings. You can't do it. And what about the contracting? All right, it's one thing for a court, as has been done by, I forget which judge, to say you have to pay out all these people you already contracted with and who did the work for USAID. But are you going to order the government to enter into new contracts because they have an obligation to spend the money that was appropriated to USA? How does a judge do that? Judge can't do that. It's like 100 times worse. These school desegregation cases were a problem for the courts, even though it was an unalloyed evil that they were trying to combat, de jure segregation. But how do you fix that?
Right.
Judges are it's not for judges with 2 or 3 law clerks. They can't run a government. And so what we have here is, okay, I mentioned Article 1, the Congress. Congress isn't doing its job. Article 2 is the president. If the president, who has taken an oath to faithfully execute the laws and the Constitution of the United States through hundreds of thousands of people who work directly or indirectly for him, decides, I don't want to faithfully execute the laws and the Constitution of the United States. Who is, even if there's a power of contempt, which can't be applied in any event to the presidency, how is the court supposed to deal with that?
I think the founders thought it would be Congress to impeachment.
Correct. That's the solution. And because the Article 1 branch Congress has forsaken its role in that regard, we're nowhere. We're left with nothing but the courts, who can't even enforce their own orders. And go back to the thing. And then the dangers of what he's trying to accomplish. Mizell made a good point. One good point he made to the judges, there's a whole big issue here about redressability. And that's something that we lawyers know about in the context of injunctions, right? When you seek an injunction against somebody to prevent them from doing something or to compel them to do something that the law requires them to do, one of the things you have to show, if you're a plaintiff seeking that injunctive relief, is that it fixes the problem. Right? That, okay, if I stop so-and-so from polluting into the river, is that going to make the river better? Well, if it turns out the pollution's going to get into the river anyway, you can argue that, well, the injunction's just pointless, and equity abhors, pointless injunctions. Courts are not supposed to issue injunctions where they don't do anybody any good. Well, here's the thing with Perkins Coie. Let's say they get every ounce of relief they seek, which is invalidation of the findings in paragraph 1, restoration of security clearances, full access to all government buildings, the right to engage with any government official on anything without their clients being punished. And there are probably some other things I have to go back to the order. Let's say they win everything.
Right.
You're giant aerospace corporation and you're the general counsel, and you have a matter where you're trying to win a big contract or get something from the Defense Department that your business depends upon. And for 50 years, for 40, 35 years, that was the number they said. I don't know how old Perkins Coie is. You've used so-and-so, your government contracting lawyer, who's the best in the business at Perkins Coie. Are you going to use him or her to go in to the Trump DOD to make that argument? Even if, and especially if, Perkins Coie wins and pisses off the president even more? The answer is, if you're looking out for your company, looking out for your shareholders, and you want to achieve the result, and you don't want your employees to have to be laid off because you don't get the business, you got perfectly good reasons to go hire some other firm. And that's a big, that's just an example of the danger that this corrupt president presents. There's something that a historian, Sir Ian Kershaw, described when he was a historian of the Nazi era and a biographer of Adolf Hitler. And there was this concept that was known in Nazi Germany as working toward the Führer. Mm-hmm. And what that meant was Hitler didn't have to give you the order. You knew what he wanted. Right. So you didn't have to talk to him. You didn't have to talk to any of his minions. You just did what you thought he wanted you to do. An example of that, kind of trivial example of that I always use, is in 2019 when Donald Trump went to visit the giant U.S. naval base in Japan and parked in the harbor was the USS John McCain, and they covered up the John McCain. They covered up with bunting the name of the ship and all evidence that it was there because they didn't want to piss off Trump. And nobody at the White House actually ordered them to do that, or Trump didn't order them to do that. It was actually the White House military office just on its own called up the Pentagon and says, hide this fucking destroyer from this guy because he's going to get mad. And that's the problem, is that these bureaucrats know they don't want to do anything for people who Trump doesn't like. And he doesn't have to issue the executive order. Or he can issue the executive order and say, this law firm, see, this executive order is on my shit list. And then he can issue another illegal executive order saying, these 20 companies and firms and people of 50 are on the president's shit list, and thou shalt not deal with him, get struck down by a federal judge.
Right.
Like, based upon this decision yesterday. But everybody knows. And Trump gets his way anyway. And so my point is, the litigation at the end doesn't help us. I mean, it does help us because we get to, so this guy's a criminal, this guy's doing illegal things, he's a constitutional miscreant. But at the end of the day, people are going to have to stand up and say, basta, enough. And it's going to require mobilization of people who don't want to be involved in politics, who don't want to be marching out on the street, who don't want to be taking positions and being controversial.
Yeah.
And if we don't get that, we're fucked.
Yeah. So just two quick things. One is I did a lot of reading over the last few months about how the legal profession handled Nazi Germany, and what you just described is exactly right. I mean, essentially, the bar and the judges, the Association of Judges, over time allowed themselves to step by step adopt a code in which, by the end, defense lawyers were required to advance the interests that they thought Hitler would want. Like literally everyone, like the prosecutors did, the judges did, the defense lawyers, like that became the law in Germany, is that everyone had to intuit what it is the Fuhrer would want and advance that. And it destroyed, obviously.
And the same thing happened in Russia since 2000.
Correct. I was going to say, and the same thing happened
the same thing is happening in Hungary.
Right. So that's the first thing. The second is that I have always said, I said this honestly after 2020, that the legal system is not going to save democracy. It may buy time for democracy. Like it will buy time for the other branches of government to solve democracy. But fundamentally, the courts are not, as you say, equipped to stand up where Congress won't stand up. Like they are equipped to buy time, but not ultimately to solve it. And I think that is probably a depressing note on which we can end. George Conway, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Marc, for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Defending Democracy. Make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. We'll see you next time.